Welcome back, everyone, to Unhoused and Unfiltered. This is episode 7. So if you like us, go to our, like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you need to do to get us further up in those charts. This is great. As you see, we're both coming to you remotely. Unfortunately, I have a sick child, so I'm doing this remotely instead of in office. But I'm Nick Cook, the Director of Public Policy for the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness.
And I'm Sarah Rennie, the Director of Advocacy of the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. And thanks for doing this, Nick, with the sick kid. We've all been there, and we've all had the 2 a.m. Daddy, I don't feel good. So we appreciate you still showing up today. I just want to also put in my plug for Micah. We're a membership organization, so please consider joining us. We need your voice. Please also, of course, like and subscribe. This video, I will do a shout out that we did rank in the 70s on the Apple podcast. So we're getting some bounce, both state and national. And that's because of you. And because it's important to me, and of course, I was sick last week. Make sure to listen to Nick's update on the budget because it was really, really good. And also, please don't forget to listen to podcast 4. We still want to keep that issue around veteran guardianships in your forefront of your mind.
And if you are a member of MICA and you have an opportunity, go to our website and advocate to the members of Congress on those budget concerns that I brought up last week. We have a live action up there. Go to our website, myhomeless.org, and tell your members of Congress that you're concerned about the levels of funding for the HUD. But we have some other concerns, don't we, Sarah?
Yeah, and we're coming to you without a guest because we should probably call these special podcasts like HUD Watch, because right at the beginning of sort of the new request for funding opportunities, which we expect, or the notice of funding opportunities, which we expect to come out in a couple weeks. But because of that, HUD has been putting out the Housing and Urban Development, which gives us that $108 million pretty much funds all homeless services in Michigan. They give us an idea of where they're leaning and where some of their challenges for our services might be. So one of the things we wanted to talk about to you today is the Housing and Urban Development is making a lot of statements around religion, around service delivery, and we want to bring you the facts around those things, as well as what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, as you know, it is kind of concerning, Sarah, that the administration is talking about faith-based service in the same vein that they are also talking about nonprofits pushing a woke agenda.
Right.
So you have one where faith-based that can deny services for a multitude of reasons are allowed to operate because the administration feels that they are on the right side, whereas those that are pushing housing first are considered woke and not really working. But as we've discussed many times in this podcast, we know permanent housing solutions in Michigan are over 90% effective compared to transitional housing, which is 65. And, I listened to Secretary Turner, who was in the House and in the Senate defending the budget recommendation, and both parties on both sides of the aisle in both chambers really disagreed with him on that housing first doesn't work. And in fact, in Secretary Turner's own words, he said, "Well, when we found my uncle, who was a veteran suffering from PTSD and substance use disorder, we brought him into our house, found him wraparound services." Which, as you and I both know, is what Housing First is supposed to be. It's just never been funded at the level it's supposed to. And so those wraparound services typically aren't funded.
Yeah,
So
and I think
that to
that's an
me is,
incredibly important point. So we got to separate these things, right? We've got a lot to cover today. And the first thing is supporting Housing First has nothing to do with being religious or not. In fact, it's actually, I would argue, the basis of, as a Sunday church-going Catholic, the basis of our religion, which is that we're going to welcome the stranger, we're going to help the helpless, and we're going to find folks care and kindness. So we have that myth. And it's really interesting to me that Secretary Turner even is sort of reinforcing that Housing First works by talking about his own family. And then we have to separate that all this language around woke and radical ideologies from Housing First and what they mean by woke and radical. So I know there's a whole list of things so that people don't think we're making this up, where HUD has talked about this. So I want to make sure that we've like laid the foundation for folks so folks know why we're so concerned.
Yeah, and I want to, you and I know this. There are many, many faith-based organizations that are part of the COC process that work with us on a daily basis that do exactly what you said. Invite all those to the table to participate and get them the services they deserve. What we're talking about is those faith-based services that deny because of gender ideology, uh, maybe economic opportunity, color. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, so what we're looking at is, first of all, I want to step back because there's this push from the administration that says we want to engage faith-based organizations. I want to first say, as you know, a very deeply religious human, there have been faith-based organizations engaged in this work for decades. Nothing is stopping them, and nothing is prohibited folks from getting money. The fact is faith-based organizations have to make sure they're non-discriminatory, and you have to serve people in a way that, you know, aligns with the law, which we all agree with, and most faith-based organizations do. This is really an excuse to sort of discriminate against trans folks or folks who maybe are undocumented or certain religions that are really based on more, whiteness. This is an attempt to include religions that think they're the only way. And you're not allowed to say to someone who's homeless, come in, but you have to be Christian or Catholic. That's just not something we allow under sort of our values. And so it's really, frankly, personally upsetting to me as a Christian, as a Catholic, that this gets hijacked as somehow faith is not allowed at the table. Faith's been allowed at the table. In fact, faith started some of these tables, right? It's just that we're not allowed because of our faith as an American, and I would be mad about this, and I'm sure as someone who defended our country would also, to discriminate on people because I have a certain faith belief.
Right. And I think, even Christians and those that are practice the Jewish faith or the Muslim faith, they know we're all children under God, as everybody says.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so bring everybody to the table. And, it is funny that the administration is targeting the housing first and equity policies, but then feels that these faith-based organizations have been left out, where housing first is a failed policy, as Secretary Turner spoke many times without giving really evidence of what they were going to try to do in the future. And then also prioritizing arrest and forced treatment over this housing first. When again, I go back to the secretary's own comments where he said, we found my uncle, we got him off the streets, we got him the supports he needed to get him back on his feet.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on. So I want to go through some of these things that they've mentioned, um, so that our listeners know, because we live and breathe this stuff, what we're talking about. In addition to sort of the testimony you heard, the Trump administration is, actively rescinding Biden era policies, and they based on a woke or radical ideology. This includes focused on biological truth, encouraging faith-based, whatever biological truth means. I don't know what that means, but faith-based initiatives and shifting access. So we've already talked about housing first and equity, which is essentially and this is funny because people somehow equity has become a bad word, but it's like the fundamental American idea that we're just going to support everybody regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity, gender identity. They couldn't be more American and less radical than just serving people without encountering or inquiring whether they're deserving or who they are, right? So that's the thing that the HUD is trying to put in some restrictions. They've emphasized focusing on faith-based partnerships in a recent statement, and I think we should talk about that a little bit more because, as I've said, since I've been at this table for 25 years, there's always been faith-based partnerships. So I want, and it's not like they define it, but when they show their models, they mean a particular faith and a particular kind of partnership, which is based on a punitive, you have to believe like we do model, which I'm really mad as like as a human, who is a religious human, that gets sort of sent as all faith, right? They're looking at campuses where people have to come in and learn how to pray and learn how to be part of a particular faith. And the reason that hasn't been part of our work is because it's not a part about, first, it's not best practice, but it's also probably not constitutional, right? And it's not our values as Americans. So I really want to, I know this is an I statement, not a Micah statement, get around this idea that they use this language at HUD. Uh, it makes it sound like, Christians are out being persecuted out at every housing advocacy table. I've worn my, you know, I've worn my rosary, I've worn my St. Jude medal. Like nobody's come out and said to me, oh my goodness, there's a Catholic here. There is no basis for this idea that there's a bias against Christians in this work.
Yeah, no, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It was really started on those Judeo-Christian beliefs of taking care of your community, taking care of those around you. You see it in the Muslim faith that they have tenets of taking care of those in your community. So we really want to emulate those beliefs.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I don't want to, I'm talking about my experience as a Catholic, but there are Jewish activists, there are Muslim, every faith has folks who come to this work and work for the very limited wages because we're faith-based, right? And it's all about welcoming the stranger, accompanying folks in pain, supporting people in poverty. So the idea that this language that we need to encourage faith-based partnerships, again, as I like to say, it's a problem without a solution. Best case, worst case, it's really code words, right? To what
Right.
what they really mean, which is a type of faith that requires people who receive services to believe the way they do, which is frankly, I think, un-American.
Wait. And so, do you believe that, in your opinion, when we do this, do we marginalize certain communities?
Oh, sure. The only time as a Catholic I've had people concerned about my Catholicism is queer folks asking if I'm going to treat them well, right? Because they're scared. And that was before all of this sort of divisiveness is going on. I think queer folks, Muslims, non-Christians, um, folks who just have had bad experiences, traumas within their own churches, all of whom are going to just not seek services.
Yeah, and we know statistically, the majority of youth on the street are
Are gay.
LGBTQ. Yeah,
Yeah.
and their families have chastised them, their community has chastised them, pushed them out. So if you go to a faith-based organization that continues to do this, you're just going to push them further and further into the margins.
Well, and we've already heard anecdotal horror story too. It empowers folks to treat gay youth as other and tell them they're not right and there is something wrong with them. So
Mhm.
it compounds trauma over trauma. I'm not saying everybody who's in these faith-based groups are doing that, but we certainly have heard from people with lived experience that they are not welcome, particularly transgender folks, but also gay um, young men are not welcome at these shelters.
Right. Yeah. And it is disheartening to hear these stories. For any of us that have done street outreach, you see a young person on the street, and you have that conversation. You find out that their family pushed them to the side because of their religious belief or their upbringing, and you can see them reaching out for help would be tougher. Why is in why is the administration moving this way? Is it because the system's, as Secretary Turner continues to say, is it housing first is a failed policy? Do they feel that there's not enough inclusion? Why do they feel that this is the best way to go?
Well, I think that's a good question. I want to also back up because I want to make sure we're being realistic about what, so our re listeners understand that when we say that folks are not welcome or you hear these stories, people are being, harassed and sort of uh, targeted for being gay. And it is our belief that we don't question somebody's identity. It's just not relevant. It's not like these folks are coming in and saying there's some agenda. They just want somewhere to sleep and somewhere warm. As traditionally, we just don't question who someone is before we provide them services, right? Because we don't want them to freeze to death. We want them to get care.
Yeah.
So I want to be really clear that this, because it sounds like whenever we talk about identity, um, that we're taking sides. And the truth is, the homeless folks are the people who don't take sides. We don't, we're not involved in some massive culture war. We want people not to freeze to death. We want them to get care.
Yeah, and I think that is, super important to highlight because you have the trauma of your family or the reason that you're on the streets occurring, be it sexual assault or family disagreements, whatever your issue is, and then they don't feel welcome, they don't feel safe. Then you couple that with self-medication, either through drugs or alcohol, and then now you're in this cycle of you're becoming chronically homeless. And it wasn't the what the administration is saying is mental health or substance use disorder. It is the trauma that got you onto the street, and then not feeling safe anywhere, using substances or alcohol to escape the trauma. Where we want to get people off the street, we want to get them connected to services as part of that housing first policy to ensure they are safe and can continue on to a stable life.
So, and then to circle back to your important question of why is the administration doing this? I mean, I guess everyone who listens to us, we could all have a like, uh, you know, a beer together and be like, why are they doing this? But it is, I can tell you, so I don't have like a meaningful answer other than it's part of a pattern of what they want to accomplish, which includes incarceration, a certain ideology around being poor, that being poor is bad, being gay is bad, and therefore you don't deserve services, right? You
Okay.
don't deserve care.
Yeah.
They want folks incarcerated. I do think there's a sense that homeless camps are ugly and not attractive, and they want our streets cleaned up and pretty to be pretty. They want folks put into you know on treatment. So all I can say is this is all part of a pattern to, it sounds good, right? Like we're going to make sure our faith-based, because if I didn't work on this, I'd be like, well, yeah, all faiths should be allowed to make sure that they're part of this partnership. But it's always not exactly what they mean, right? They use words like that like humane treatment from our conversation around
Veterans. Yeah.
veterans. The words aren't real. So all I can tell you is this is part of a natural process around treating our neighbors as if they're not people.
Yeah, and yeah, it goes back to that othering conversation we've had. But the one thing that also, when I was listening to the hearings, that got brought up, and few members of Congress actually called out Secretary Turner on this, was the homeless industrial complex. And a couple of the members said, I don't see anybody in this line of work getting rich. I don't see anybody trying to advance their careers based off of helping the most vulnerable and most neediest of Americans.
I was gonna say, I'm looking for that paycheck. Where's that getting me rich paycheck?
Yeah, no kid. I mean, I do this because and I know you and I have had this conversation. We had it in the first episode,
Yeah.
that we do this because we love the work.
Yes.
We love communicating with the unhoused. We love advocating for our service providers. We love, it's just a calling. It's not a job.
And I
Um,
will say that's what makes me so angry. It's part of my faith, and to use faith in this way is the opposite. It's offensive to those of us who are persons of faith, because if you truly live your beliefs, it is not about government telling people that they're not they're not worthy, they're not to be cared for. And so it's very, very obscene to me that they're using this idea of focus-based and faith-based partnership as a straw man to do these things that are very, very the opposite of most faith beliefs.
and so where's this notion of the homeless industrial complex come from? Why is this even a conversation? I guess,
Well,
you look around at all, I mean, everybody can go to the mom and pop shelter in their community and be like, I've known this lady my entire life. They're not making
I was
millions.
going to say, I do recommend folks who are listening to this podcast go visit your homeless shelter, or if you haven't talked to someone who runs or works in this, none of us are part of any sort of industrial complex. None of us are particularly doing this because it's fancy and, we're getting lauded and people are, I think it comes from lauded, and that like people in our community are saying, you are the fanciest person in the world, here's $1 million. Like that has never happened in the homeless services work. I think it's because, Micah is part of litigation, and so is a lot of homeless advocacy groups around what the administration's trying to do. Because we believe in the Constitution, because we believe in the service model, we have put up a fight. And I think the commentary of the homeless industrial complex is straight up around the idea that we aren't willing to just say, okay, we're going to do what you say.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely a reaction to us standing up.
Right. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point. I mean, we talk about another industrial complex. We have the military industrial complex.
Now that's a real one.
Yeah,
Like,
and we've known for decades. Everybody's heard the story of the $400 toilet seat in the submarine, and all these crazy fraud, waste, and abuse stories. And now they're trying to tie that to the homelessness.
oh, that's a good point. That's the other place it's coming from, is like there's fraud, waste, and abuse, just like in the military,
And,
which you've
we.
been in the military. Is there fraud? I mean, there is some,
I
right?
mean, there always is. I mean, you always see the movie where the contractor is skimming off the top, or you hear about, this, that, or the other thing. It happens. Just like in any large organization, fraud, waste, and abuse happens. But you got to call it out when it occurs. But is it rampant where it's part of a larger, as I used to say, conspiracy? No.
What is a conspiracy?
No, and I think that's funny is Pentagon goes through financial audits every year and fails them miserably
I
every year.
did not know that until you mentioned that.
And do do we talk about abolishing the Pentagon or the Department of Defense, or
No, we keep giving them more money. And I want to be clear. I think we should have a Defense Department. I mean, you have mentioned in other conversations that we're a little silly this year in our budget because we're trying to give the Navy, I think you
bunch of
said
battleships? That's
battleships that they don't need because nobody uses them.
Mhm.
Um, so those types of things. But to your point, we're constantly giving money to the Pentagon, um, even though they're failing their audits. Are there issues with fraud, waste, and abuse in homeless works? I'm sure there's somebody somewhere who's done things because humans do that. But like you said, we're not. I don't understand why we would defund the entire work we do. We certainly aren't going to do it with the Pentagon, and that's a much larger budget, right? Can you talk a little bit comparatively? It's a big difference between what
Yeah,
we put in defense and what we put on
yeah. I mean, if you
homeless
already,
folks.
we look at Michigan brings in, 108 million, and I know we're comparing apples to oranges, but you look at, this year's Pentagon increase. I mean, it was a $10 billion increase. I
With a
mean,
B, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, you're talking, that was just the increase. We're not
Yeah.
talking about the programs. I mean, not non-defense spending is so little on top of what you have based on discretion. That's just your discretionary spending. You have your non-discretionary spending, which is your Social Security, your Medicaid, your Medicare, the social safety net programs that obviously HR1 rolled back last year.
For
But
our listeners, HR1 is what everyone's calling the big beautiful bill because no one wants to call it the big beautiful bill anymore. So it's HR1.
Yeah, so with that, so that's your non-discretion. That's your non-discretionary. And then you have your discretionary spending, which is like your ag programs, your HUD programs, your transportation programs, NASA, NOAA, and then you have your defense spending, which is the 800-pound gorilla.
Right.
I mean, they suck up all the energy, but they also go through a budgeting process every year, and they're authorized and appropriated every year. And well, supposedly they're supposed to be, but that's the normal process. We have these debates in Congress. We have these open, even though they're failing their audits. And then you take a look at the continuums of care, and the secretary kept saying we have record spending. Well, yes, we also have record number of unhoused individuals, and we've talked about this before in Michigan. Every year we have about 33,000 people that are homeless. We get just enough money to put half of them in housing or get them off the streets. And when we have another 15,000 enter the system that are first time homeless.
Well, and it's
So
insane to me. Like when we talk about income inequality, I just Googled your battleship because I wanted to know a new Trump class battleship is somewhere between 9 and 13 billion dollars for one battleship. We are asking for 108 million for Michigan. I don't know what HUD's total budget is, but it's still it's equal to or around, at least one or two battleships, right? Like
I mean, yeah,
and and I
you
don't want to compare apples to oranges because I think our military deserves to be funded, but the Trump class battleship, most folks, and you can talk about this as an expert, have said that is a not something that is a necessity for our defense.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to, that's why we do quadrennial defense reviews. That's why we had base realignment and closure. Where's the best that spending can be allocated? Where can it, so we have these huge commissions to discuss this and go from there. And yeah, you're exactly right. We do not talk about spending at defense. We do not talk about what is really needed, what is not needed. We don't talk about cuts every year. And you think about that. You brought up the Trump class battleship. The entire HUD budget, which includes all their housing programs, development programs, um, fair housing initiatives, Indian housing block grants. They're proposing $73.5 billion dollars.
So I was wrong. So
Oh,
about seven battleships.
yeah. So, we could reduce the Department of Defense budget by seven battleships and have enough to fund HUD. And it's to me, I think when you're talking trillions and billions of dollars, it's hard to wrap around your head around that number. And I think when you lay it out that it costs seven battleships, which we got rid of battleships decades ago, we
Why
haven't
did we
used
get rid
them.
of battleships? For those of us who are not military, there are people who are really interested in this from our podcast,
Yeah.
your insight on the military piece. There were strategic reasons, right? We
Yeah,
did
I mean, you have aircraft carriers, you have aircraft carrier groups. They became the main battle platform. You had that they can launch planes. You had the support around them, but the overall battleship to battleship fights that we think of in
World War II,
World
really.
War. Well, and we lost our entire battleship fleet, Pacific battleship fleet in the Hawaiian in Pearl Harbor. So it tells you that we didn't need them then even. I mean, we went more to that aircraft
I
carrier
was going to say, because
platform.
you can't land, I mean, I am definitely going down a cul-de-sac, but you can't land a plane on a battleship. So that's
No,
why they're,
and it's more um, face to face. ship to ship battles. I mean, that's really what a battleship's for. And yeah, they can shoot onto land, but we also have different classes of ships that can do that too. So to
So
bring
this
these
could be our not
battleships
other
back,
podcast. We talked to Nick
yeah.
about like why we should have various because also we have blessed with his expertise on this. But it is relevant in the sense that as we look at the whys, and the reason Nick and I are going through all this, right, is one of the things that has been, and Nick will have to say the word, but there's going to be restrictions um, on fraud, waste, and abuse under HUD for folks that are both obviously engaged in fraud, waste, and abuse, but also for moving forward with whatever an woke agenda is. What's the
Yeah,
word, Nick?
proselytizing.
Yeah, I can't say it either.
Yeah,
Proselytizings.
yes, and that's right out of the president's recommendation. And I don't think I mean personally, I don't have a problem as a taxpayer that we're getting it down to the subgrantees on how they're spending their money,
Sure.
some of the transparency. I'm okay with that. But
Yeah, I'm great with that too. It's just the amount of focus on this
mm,
rather than things that we want to spend money on, right, is really the issue. It's not whether or not we should have Trump battle class battleships versus this. It's we don't spend any attention on the cost of that battleship, but we're going to now fly spec these, exhausted people who are going down two tracks and going out like we had Khadijah and asking them to fill out a bunch of forms and trying to determine if what they said was correct. It's about where are we punishing people and why.
and to kind of level set this conversation on pay too. You look at our social workers who work hard in every facility that we have in every facet of the homeless response system. Um, a lot of them are recipients of the services because they just don't make any money.
Yeah,
And,
that
and
is
it's
true.
and they're working on shoestring budgets, these nonprofits that really kind of hollow these programs together. We go back to what we were talking to Khadijah about, street outreach. Lansing gets between 19,000 for Ingham County. That's a,
Yeah.
a very large county in Michigan. So, we're not even
Well, and if
really
we were
talking
paying
about millions of dollars.
we're paying one person $19,000 and they serve more than one staff person with that, they would still be below the poverty level. To give
Right.
people an understanding, it's 19,000 for the whole county to do what Khadijah's doing. And so when we talk about the income inequality and the economies of scale, that's why we talk about these where the government is focusing its audit, fraud, waste, and abuse attention, because is there somebody somewhere who's misusing that $19,000 somewhere? Not that one, but somewhere. It's possible, but the focus on it is designed to harm people like Khadijah because she's going to be the one who has to fill out all the forms, be scrutinized, and it's not about the money you're saving, or you'd really choose a bigger program.
I mean, and that's really my larger concern is that we're talking about such, if somebody's committing apps fraud or
Oh yeah,
I
we need to
mean,
tunnel. We need to.
then that's what we have the legal system for. Go
Yeah,
after. Um, they're my counselor I put in for for you. But for the average person, this burn it down, start the whole system over again when we know that if we infuse cash, we know what works, we have the data. Um, you know, like you said, the cost is going to be the human toll. We're
yes.
gonna have people lost in the system. We're gonna have people that were stably housed, kicked out. Because I also want to point out that they're not talking about the programs that are there, continuing to fund them and off ramp onto
All
a
right. So it's going to be a giant waste of money to start over again, too, when we know what works.
correct. I mean, they're talking about putting people back out on the streets. And member of Congress even raised this in both hearings, said, so how many people are going to end up on the streets out of these programs? And Secretary Turner kept saying, well, housing first is a failed program. So he even knows that that's what's going to happen. He just won't respond to it.
And we think it's at least, do you remember what I don't remember what the New York Times said if they thought it was nationally.
170,000.
170,000 they could just by stopping these programs. Um, wow. So that's a really good point. Like we it's going to cost, if they were concerned about money, right? It would be they wouldn't be they would be looking at the cost benefit analysis versus of shutting this all down and starting over versus whatever percentage of what they think is fraud, waste, and abuse, which again, I know from the research is very low in some of these programs. Am I going to say it's zero? Well, no, because humans do human things, and there's always somebody. There's always that guy, that guy at that party where you're like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
Um, can you talk before we move into a little bit about sort of some things that continuing to talk about the housing first. Can you talk about this whole tying fraud, waste, and abuse to the woke agenda and why that might be problematic?
Yeah, I mean, when you tie fraud, waste, and abuse and say woke agenda, are they going to say anybody that talks about housing first is committing fraud? And are they going to shut down those programs? Are they going to go after those people? Are they going to push them further, those systems out of existence? And then you're going to have a vacuum in that community.
Well,
Uh,
and not to be all lawyerly, but there's two things too. Like there's the free speech issue that goes with this. Like, and then there's the sort of like laboratories of democracy, right? The states' rights issues. Some of this stuff works in some states and some, so there are legal reasons too. You shouldn't probably tie people's opinions and values to fraud, waste, to what are legal crimes, which are fraud, waste, and abuse.
right. And I think the administration is just trying to, and for whatever reasons, I mean, we can sit here and have a whole podcast on the reasons that they're trying to do to help, quote unquote, help people with the least amount of money. Shifting them to camps, not giving them stable, not making them stably housed. I mean, we saw the model that everybody was holding up from the administration in Utah, has
Yeah,
now
talk about
become,
Utah because I don't think everyone knows about that. Because when I mention it, people don't
yeah,
really know what's going on.
Utah got rid of housing first. Utah, it was a debate in their legislature. They passed laws and they created a homeless encampment. Think about your World War II internment camps in the United States, big tents out in the middle of a desert area, fence around it, nice shiny buildings for the service providers. But the encampment people were to live out in these camps until
Like a
they.
barracks kind of situation.
Correct, correct. I mean, for, when I say internment camp, most people in America now understand what an internment camp looked like during World War II, and can visualize that. And that's that was the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the plans for this, was wow, we're going back to internment camps. And really it is under that belief of if we put them there and give them job training or give them substance use disorder or alcohol treatment or sexual violence treatment, you name the treatment, they should be able to then pull themselves up by the bootstraps and move on. Um, but we know the data doesn't. When you live in barracks type lifestyle like that and you are have trauma or surrounded by trauma,
Oh, it
it's
makes
just
everything so much worse, right?
it,
You can't really, folks are struggling, and it's also not safe. It's also not your space. You don't know anybody you're with. I know from the reading that Utah has backed away from that now. They do not want to fund it. It also was really expensive.
right. I mean, and we know from the data in Michigan that transitional housing costs a heck of a lot more than housing somebody long term. So again, it goes from person centered to, I guess you would call it person centered housing first to, you know, I don't even know what to
I don't
call
even know
it.
what you call it, like
Yeah,
forced treatment encampment.
yeah,
But I do know, like, let's say there's folks out there that's like, yeah, but does it, we got to do something. I can tell you it's cost more Utah doesn't want to really do it. The community, even though it did not think it was a good idea in Utah, and so now we have this like potential pilot, right? That nobody wanted and didn't work. It's still shocking to me that that HUD is doubling down, knowing that the folks in Utah were like, "Yeah, no, thank you. We don't want to fund this anymore."
Well, I mean, we saw this with their VA program in California, where they took an old VA facility and started converting it to a veterans encampment. And we go through our episode 4 of our podcast talking about veterans and conservatorship and guardianship. That's kind of where they wanted to move these individuals is to this encampment.
Yeah,
But
that's not going well either, though, right?
no, right. They one thing is the executive branch realized Congress has the power of purse, and they had to go back and ask for funding to run this,
Yeah.
and it's costing a lot more. And Congress is starting to scrutinize it. So
So, in addition to this being just sort of not workable and I think morally wrong, it's really expensive.
correct. I mean, we see it on a microcosm in Ingham County, how much they spent on the $800,000 on these pods for 54 people. And rumor is that it's going to cost between $1 to $3 million a year to keep this thing going
Wow.
just for 54 people.
That is
Um,
bonkers.
yes. So, that's it's unfortunate. On top of that, you have other concerns, security, children being, where are you going to, if children show up there, where are you going to put that? There's all kinds of
That they haven't really thought through,
thought there.
right?
Correct.
So it sounds like, because as we come to the end of our time, that we just need to reiterate what does work, right? Is Khadijah street outreach needs money. Like
Right.
people like Khadijah, we need money for street outreach. We need money for housing first. We need, better jobs. We need money for affordable housing developments. We need to, buckle down and create like a 5-year plan where people are addressed through the throughout the continuum with an investment in folks that are in crisis right now.
Right. And those supportive services go back to when the secretary said housing first is a failed model. We have not invested in supportive services. And in fact, in the NOFO that is under um, litigation, to emphasize that point, HUD would not allow transitioning of any of the programs that they were defunding into supportive services to get at what HUD Secretary Turner said is needed is those supportive services. So,
No, it was the worst governmental doublespeak in that documents under litigation. It just didn't make any sense. I also
no,
just want to remind folks to bring us back to the theme of this podcast is the work you're doing, right? Where you go out to the camps, you have a nonprofit that you and your buddy founded, right? That you get the leftover food from the Lansing lug nuts, is that right?
correct. Yep,
And
yep,
that's the most faith-based work, whether you're religious or not, that I hear of, right? That's the essence of most religions,
yeah,
is just
yeah.
going out feeding the hungry.
Yeah, and Khadijah has joined us. Khadijah does a lot of it with us, and my buddy. We don't get paid. We don't raise any money. We just do the nonprofit so that the lug nuts caterer can actually pay off or write it off for that food that was donated. And we really do it just because we love the work. We love connecting to individuals.
And that is the spirit of most faith, and that's what we need to center. We don't need a special message to partner with work that, like you're doing. We need to just go out and support work like yours.
Correct. And I think that's every we have a system that is woefully underfunded. Um, you know, we're hoping that everybody will go to the MICA website, go to our call to action, email your member of Congress, tell them it's important to reject the administration's HUD proposal, support things like Section 406 in the Senate version of the Leo budget at the state level to ensure 30 million goes to the continuums of care to do increase the work that they're doing. And just continue to advocate for those that are our most vulnerable citizens.
Well, I want to thank everyone. I, of course, want to remind you to like and subscribe and share. We are a very small, very non-funded podcast, so we need your help. And I also please join us and join Micah. Thank you so much for everything you're doing, Nick, and for allowing me to go through my cul-de-sac of like, what do battleships do?
It's always fun to talk about the military, so we can talk about battleships, and we can start another podcast, Battleships and Micah.
There you go. All right. You have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.